This story tells about a teenager who lost his youth because of one mistake. Not because he was cruel or greedy, not because he wanted to hurt anyone, but because he believed that nothing bad could ever happen to him. Aiden was only 16 when his life quietly stopped moving forward. Not slowly, not dramatically like in the movies, but suddenly. In a single morning when time seemed to snap and freeze in place. Until then, his life looked ordinary. School days that blended into each other, evenings spent online, weekends that passed without leaving any memories. Like most teenagers, he believed real life would begin later. He didn't know that later could be taken away so easily. Aiden wasn't a troublemaker. Teachers didn't complain about him, police had never called his name, and he didn't wander the streets looking for problems. His mistake was quieter, harder to notice. He trusted the digital world too much. Everything there felt distant, unreal, harmless. Clicking a button didn't feel like an action that could destroy a future. He loved online games. They were predictable, structured, fair in a way real life never was. So when he discovered that people were placing bets on those games, it didn't feel dangerous. It felt logical. He knew the teams, watched the matches, understood the mechanics. In his mind, it wasn't gambling. It was calculation, probability, skill. His first bet was placed late at night when the apartment was silent and his mother was asleep. The amount was small, almost meaningless. The win was small too, but the feeling stayed with him. A quiet thrill, a sense of control. For the first time, he felt like he had figured something out before everyone else. That feeling became addictive faster than he expected. Soon, betting stopped being something he tried just once. It turned into a routine. School ended, dinner passed unnoticed, and Aiden locked himself in his room staring at glowing screens. He learned how odds shifted, how lines moved, how people reacted. He began to believe he wasn't just playing. He was mastering a system. In real life, no one called him smart. Online, numbers seemed to agree with him. He never read the legal warnings. Words like illegal platform, financial monitoring, and fraud investigation meant nothing to him. If a website existed, if it accepted money, it had to be allowed. That was his logic. He didn't know that many of those platforms were already under surveillance. Their users logged, tracked, and connected through invisible systems that never forgot anything. The chats came later. People spoke confidently there, sharing guaranteed outcomes and inside information. They sounded older, experienced, certain. Aiden liked that they treated him seriously. No one asked his age. No one warned him. To them, he wasn't a kid. He was an account. One message changed everything. It wasn't threatening or suspicious, just a suggestion. They asked him to help move a few bets through his account to spread traffic. Nothing illegal, they said, nothing risky. He'd get a percentage for helping out. Aiden hesitated for a moment, then agreed. He didn't see a crime. He saw cooperation, numbers passing through numbers. That was the moment he crossed a line he didn't even know existed. Nothing happened right away. Days passed, weeks. Some sites disappeared, others paid late. Aiden learned not to panic. He convinced himself this was normal. He convinced himself. And that was the most dangerous part. The knock on the door came early in the morning. He was getting ready for school, half asleep, thinking about last night's matches. The knock wasn't loud or aggressive. It was calm, professional. His mother opened the door and the air in the apartment changed instantly. No one shouted, no one grabbed him. They spoke politely, showed documents, asked him to come with them. Aiden thought it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. He was a minor. He hadn't meant to do anything wrong. Inside the car, when the door closed and the city began sliding past the window, he realized something terrifying. No one cared what he meant to do. The law didn't ask about intentions, age, or innocence. It only looked at actions and the traces they left behind. That was the moment Aiden understood. His youth hadn't ended in prison. It had ended much earlier. The room they brought Aiden into smelled like old paper and disinfectant. It wasn't frightening in the way movies made interrogation rooms look. There were no harsh lights, no shouting voices, no slammed fists on the table. That made it worse. Everything felt calm, procedural, final. Calm enough to make him believe for a few dangerous minutes that this could still end well. A man in a dark jacket sat across from him, flipping through a thin folder. He didn't look angry. He looked tired, like someone, who had seen the same story too many times and already knew how it would end. Aiden Miller, the man said without looking up, 16 years old. Student. No prior record. Aiden nodded. His mouth was dry. He wanted to speak, to explain everything at once, to prove that this was all some kind of misunderstanding. But the words didn't come out in the right order. "You understand why you're here?" the man asked. Aiden shook his head. "I was just playing, betting. I didn't know it was illegal." The man finally looked at him. His eyes weren't cruel, they were empty. "Most people don't," he said quietly. "That doesn't change anything." They showed him screenshots, logs, transaction histories, chat messages he barely remembered sending. When Aiden saw them laid out like that, stripped of context and excuses, they looked different, dangerous, organized, intentional. He tried to point at the screen to explain that he was just following instructions, that he didn't understand the scale of what was happening. "You moved money connected to manipulated matches," the man said. "You helped distribute funds tied to fraud. Whether you understood it or not, you participated." "But I'm a minor," Aiden whispered, "and doesn't that matter?" "It matters," the man replied, "just not in the way you think." The hours blurred together. A lawyer arrived. Someone appointed, someone neutral. His mother came later, pale and shaking, her eyes full of questions she didn't know how to ask. When she looked at Aiden, he felt smaller than he ever had before. Not guilty, not evil, just unbearably young. The holding cell was colder than he expected. The bench was hard, the walls scratched with names and dates that felt like warnings carved into stone. Aiden sat there, staring at his hands, trying to understand how clicking buttons in his bedroom had led him here. He wasn't afraid of prison yet. He was afraid of time. Days passed, then weeks. School became a distant memory, something that belonged to another version of him. The court hearings were short and clinical. Words like probation and detention and sentence floated through the air, heavy and irreversible. Everyone spoke for him, about him, around him. No one really spoke to him. When the sentence was announced, Aiden didn't cry. 1 year. 1 year in a juvenile correctional facility. It wasn't the worst possible outcome. Everyone told him that. The lawyer, the judge, even his mother trying desperately to sound hopeful. "It could have been more," she said, holding his hand too tightly. "At least it's not adult prison." Aiden nodded. He understood the words. He just didn't understand how a year could feel so heavy before it had even begun. The facility was surrounded by fences, not walls. That detail stayed with him. It looked less like a prison and more like a place you were supposed to escape from, except no one ever did. The guards were strict but indifferent. They followed rules, not emotions. The other inmates looked like him, too young, too thin, too quiet, or too loud. His first night there, Aiden didn't sleep. The sounds were unfamiliar. Footsteps, distant arguments, the metallic echo of doors locking. He stared at the ceiling, replaying every decision that had led him there. Every bet, every message, Every moment he had chosen convenience over caution. Days inside followed a strict schedule. Wake up, count, eat, work, study, count again. Time moved differently there, slower, heavier, as if each hour wanted to be remembered. Aiden learned quickly that the past didn't matter inside those fences. Only behavior did. Some boys were angry, others were broken. A few pretended it was nothing, laughing too loudly, talking about what they'd do when they got out. Aiden mostly stayed quiet. He listened. He watched. He learned how easily a single mistake could reshape an entire life. At night, when the lights went out, he thought about the version of himself who believed he was smarter than the system. That version felt like a stranger now, naive, reckless, gone. And yet somewhere deep inside, a dangerous thought began to form. What if this year didn't just take something from him? What if it changed him into someone else entirely? By the third month, Aiden stopped counting the days. At first, he had scratched small lines into the underside of his bed, marking each sunrise like a victory over time. But the marks began to blur together, and the effort felt pointless. Time inside the facility wasn't something you defeated. It was something that wore you down slowly, patiently, until resistance felt childish. He learned the unspoken rules quickly. Don't stare too long. Don't ask unnecessary questions. Don't show fear, but never show weakness either. Most conflicts never became physical, but tension lived in the air like electricity. One wrong word, one misunderstood look, and the whole place seemed ready to ignite. Aiden kept his head down. He attended classes, did the assigned work, and followed instructions. The guards barely noticed him, which was exactly how he wanted it. Being invisible felt safer than being strong. There was a boy named Marcus who sat next to him in the classroom. Marcus was 17, taller, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had been there longer and carried himself like someone who had accepted the place as temporary reality. One day, without looking at Aiden, Marcus spoke. "You don't belong here," he said quietly. Aiden didn't answer. "Not like the others," Marcus continued. "You didn't come in angry." That night they talked, carefully, in fragments. Marcus had been involved in car theft, not because he needed money, but because he liked the feeling of control. Aiden listened and realized how similar that sounded to his own story. Different methods, same illusion. "I thought I was smarter than them," Marcus said. "Turns out I was just easier to use." The words stayed with Aiden. Inside, days blended together, but people didn't. Aiden began to notice patterns. Who got into trouble, who survived quietly, who broke down under pressure. He realized that many of them weren't criminals in the way the world imagined. They were mistakes that had grown too large to ignore. One afternoon during a mandatory counseling session, the therapist asked him a simple question. "Do you think you're guilty?" Aiden hesitated. For months he had clung to the idea that ignorance meant innocence. But sitting there in that quiet room, he finally understood the difference. "I did it," he said slowly. "I just didn't understand what it was." The therapist nodded. "That's the hardest kind of guilt," she replied, "because it doesn't disappear when you're punished." That night, Aiden couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because of clarity. He began replaying events not as accidents, but as choices. Each click, each agreement. Each time he ignored doubt because it was inconvenient. And for the first time, he stopped blaming the system. Months passed. Winter came and went behind the fences. Aiden grew quieter, but also sharper. He read books he had never cared about before. Law, psychology, biographies of people who had fallen and risen again. He began helping others with homework. It gave him a strange sense of purpose. One day, a guard called his name and told him to follow. The walk to the administration office felt heavier than usual. Inside, a woman sat behind the desk reading his file. "You've had no incidents," she said. "Your reports are clean." Aiden nodded, unsure where this was going. "There's a possibility," she continued, "of early release. Not guaranteed, but considered." Hope was a dangerous thing. Aiden felt it, rise anyway, warm and terrifying. "When?" he asked. She closed the folder. "Not yet." That night, Marcus laughed when Aiden told him. "Don't count on it," he said. "They like to remind you freedom exists." Aiden nodded. He understood. But something had changed. For the first time since his arrest, the future didn't feel completely sealed. Still, a question haunted him. If he walked out early, who would he be? The boy who lost a year of his life? Or the boy who learned too late what one mistake can cost? Spring arrived quietly. There were no trees inside the fences, no flowers to signal the change, but Aiden felt it anyway. The air was different during morning count, lighter somehow. Or maybe it was just him. After months of living in a closed system, even the smallest shift felt significant. Hope, however, was still dangerous. Aiden treated it like a fragile object, something he could acknowledge but not touch too closely. He had seen what happened to boys who believed too hard in early release or miracles. When those hopes collapsed, something inside them went dark. Marcus noticed the change in Aiden before anyone else. "You're thinking again," he said one evening as they sat in the common area pretending to watch television. "That's usually a bad sign in here." "I never stopped thinking," Aiden replied. "I just think differently now." Marcus smirked. "That might be worse." They had grown closer over the months, not friends in the usual sense, but something quieter and more solid. Survival allies. They didn't talk about life before much. The past felt irrelevant inside those walls, like a story that belonged to someone else. One afternoon during vocational training, an argument broke out across the room. Voices rose, chairs scraped, tension snapped. Aiden felt his body tense automatically. This was how things started. This was how people lost privileges, added months to their time. Without thinking, he stepped between two boys, his voice calm but firm. He didn't threaten. He didn't plead. He just spoke like someone who expected to be heard. To his surprise, they listened. Later, a guard pulled him aside. "That was smart," he said. "Not praise, an observation." But it stayed with Aiden longer than it should have. The evaluation came 2 weeks later. Aiden sat in a small office again, across from people who held his future in their hands. They talked about responsibility, rehabilitation, growth. They mentioned his age more than once. 16 when it started, 17 now. Still young enough, they said, for correction. "You understand why you're here?" one of them asked. "Yes," Aiden answered. And for the first time, it was true. They asked about his plans after release. He spoke carefully, honestly. School, work, staying away from anything that promised easy control. He didn't claim he'd changed completely. He claimed he was changing. That seemed to matter more. Weeks passed without news. Then one morning his name was called during count. Aiden's heart dropped. That was never good. But instead of punishment, he was escorted to administration. A familiar folder waited on the desk. "You've been approved for conditional early release," the woman said. "Effective in 30 days. The words didn't feel real. 30 days. A number so small it hurt. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder later that night. "Looks like you're getting out," he said, smiling, but his eyes didn't match. "What about you?" Aiden asked. Marcus shrugged. "Different story. Different mistakes." That was the hardest part. Understanding that justice wasn't equal, it was specific, personal. sometimes unfair. As the days counted down again, Aiden felt fear replace hope. Outside meant choices, noise, temptation, consequences without walls to stop them. On his last night, he didn't sleep. He listened to the sounds he once hated, knowing he might miss them. Routine had become safety. When the gates finally opened, the sun felt too bright. His mother stood there, thinner than he remembered, tears already falling. She hugged him like she was afraid he might disappear. As they walked away, Aiden didn't look back. He thought the hardest part was over. He was wrong. Freedom didn't feel the way Aiden had imagined it. There were no dramatic emotions, no overwhelming joy, no sense of victory. Instead, there was noise. Too much of it. Cars, voices, advertisements, phones buzzing in pockets. The world moved faster than he remembered, like it had continued without him and never once slowed down. At home, everything was familiar and strange at the same time. His room looked smaller. The desk where he used to place bets was still there, untouched, as if waiting. Aiden avoided looking at it. Some doors, once opened, never really closed. His mother tried hard not to treat him differently. Too hard. She asked normal questions, made normal dinners, smiled like everything was fine. But at night, Aiden heard her crying through the thin walls. That sound followed him into his sleep. School was worse. They placed him in a special program, separate from his old classmates. Some teachers looked at him with forced kindness, others with quiet suspicion. A few students recognized him. Whispers followed him down the hallway. No one asked directly, but everyone seemed to know. Aiden learned quickly that freedom came with invisible chains. The conditions of his release were strict. Check-ins, monitoring, no unsupervised internet access, no financial platforms of any kind. The irony wasn't lost on him. The thing that had taken his youth was now permanently forbidden. One afternoon, while helping his mother with groceries, Aiden felt his phone vibrate. A message from an unknown number. "I heard you're out." His chest tightened. Another message followed almost immediately. "You still owe us." His hands shook as he locked the phone. The past, it seemed, had not stayed behind the fences. That night he didn't tell his mother. He didn't sleep. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every sound carried memory. He realized then that prison didn't always end at the gate. Over the next few days, the messages continued. Subtle, careful, never explicit enough to show anyone else. Just reminders. Names he recognized. Platforms that no longer existed. People who hadn't been caught. They wanted him back. Not as a player, as a tool. Aiden considered ignoring them, blocking the numbers, reporting everything. But fear complicated everything. He had tasted the system once. He knew how little control he had inside it. Marcus crossed his mind often. What would he say? Probably something simple. Don't be stupid. Don't go back. But reality wasn't simple. One message stood out from the rest. One last favor. Then we disappear. Aiden stared at the words for a long time. His heart told him no. His past whispered yes. One mistake had already cost him a year. Another could cost him everything. He deleted the message. The next morning, 2 men waited across the street when he left the apartment. They didn't approach. They didn't speak. They just watched. That was when Aiden understood something terrifying. He had been released from prison, but not from the game. Fear changes shape when you recognize it. For Aiden, it stopped being sharp panic and became something heavier, more constant. A pressure that followed him everywhere. The men across the street didn't move. They didn't threaten him. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was a message. We remember you. He changed his routines, left home at different times, took longer routes, avoided familiar places. It felt disturbingly similar to life inside the facility, controlled, cautious, measured. Freedom was starting to look like another version of confinement. At his next mandatory check-in, the officer asked a routine question. "Anyone contacted you from your past activities?" Aiden hesitated. This was the moment, the safe choice, the correct one. "No," he said. The lie slid out easier than he expected, and that scared him more than the men outside. The messages stopped after a week. No explanation, no goodbye. Just silence. Aiden didn't know whether that was a good sign or a warning. Silence could mean they were done with him, or that they no longer needed permission. He focused on rebuilding, slowly, carefully. He found a part-time job stacking boxes in a warehouse, the kind of work that didn't ask questions. His hands ached at night, but the pain felt honest. Real. Every paycheck felt earned in a way money never had before. One evening, while closing up, his supervisor handed him a phone. "Someone's asking for you." Aiden's stomach dropped. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar. "Did you think it would end that easily?" the man asked. Aiden said nothing. "You were useful," the voice continued. "You still can be." "I'm done," Aiden said finally. His voice didn't shake. That surprised him. There was a pause, then a soft laugh. "No one is ever really done." The call ended. That night, Aiden made a decision. He gathered everything, some old messages, screenshots, names, platforms, dates, things he had memorized but tried to forget, evidence he had been too afraid to acknowledge. He knew what this meant: cooperation, risk, consequences he couldn't predict. But he also knew the alternative. The next morning, he told the truth. The process was slow and exhausting. Interviews, statements. Long hours repeating the same story until it felt detached from him. The investigators listened differently this time, not like they were waiting for a mistake, like they were building something. "You're doing the right thing," one of them said, "even if it doesn't feel like it." Months passed. The men never came back. Then one day a letter arrived, official, heavy, final. The charges connected to his cooperation were being formally closed. His record would remain but reduced, protected, quietly handled. Aiden sat on his bed holding the letter, waiting to feel relief. Instead, he felt empty, because that was when he realized the truth. The year he lost wasn't taken by the system. It wasn't stolen by criminals. It wasn't destroyed by a single bad decision. It was traded. For understanding, for restraint, for the knowledge that some games never end. They just change players. Aiden folded the letter and placed it in a drawer he never opened again. He didn't know what his future would look like, but for the first time he knew what it wouldn't be. Life didn't reset after that letter. Aiden had secretly hoped it would. That cooperation, honesty, and silence would somehow clean the past away. But life doesn't work like a system update. It doesn't erase corrupted files. It just builds new ones on top. The monitoring eventually ended. The check-ins stopped. His phone was just a phone again. On paper, Aiden was free. In reality, he moved through the world differently now, like someone who had learned where the ground could suddenly disappear. He finished school through evening classes, sat among people older than him, people with stories they never shared. He didn't tell his either. When teachers asked about his gap year, he said family issues. No one pushed further. People rarely want the truth. They just want something comfortable enough to accept. Marcus wrote once, "A short letter passed through official channels, got 6 more months. Don't waste what you got." Aiden read it 3 times before folding it carefully. He never replied. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know what words could possibly help. Work turned into routine. Routine turned into stability. Aiden learned to value boring days, quiet evenings, predictable mornings. Chaos had lost its appeal. One night, while walking home, he passed a group of teenagers laughing loudly, phones glowing in their hands. One of them talked excitedly about an online bet, about how easy it was, how stupid the system was. Aiden slowed down. For a moment, he considered stopping, warning them, saying something meaningful, something that would change everything. He didn't. He kept walking, not because he didn't care, but because he understood something now. Advice only works when fear already exists. Before that, it sounds like noise. Weeks later, an email arrived from an unfamiliar address. No threats, no pressure, just a simple message: you were smarter than most. Aiden stared at the screen for a long time. Then he deleted the email and emptied the trash. Some doors didn't need to be closed again. They needed to stay sealed on the anniversary of his release. He woke up early and sat by the window watching the city come alive. 1 year ago, he had walked out of a facility believing the worst was behind him. Now he understood the truth. The worst part wasn't prison. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even the loss of time. The worst part was knowing exactly how easily it could all happen again, and choosing every single day not to let it. Aiden stood up, grabbed his jacket, and stepped outside. The world didn't owe him anything, and for the first time, that felt like freedom. Aiden thought he had left the past behind. He had his routines, his part-time job, school classes, and a quiet life carefully built like a fragile house of glass. He never went near anything resembling the online betting world. He avoided shortcuts of thought, shortcuts of money, shortcuts of risk. He believed he was safe. Then one evening, about a year after his release, a letter arrived in the mailbox. No return address, just his address, name, written in clean block letters. He hesitated, his heart picking up pace, before tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, only 3 lines. "We've been watching. You're free to go, but are you really?" For a moment, his stomach sank. Fear he hadn't felt in months gripped him. Then slowly, a strange calm replaced it. He recognized the phrasing, the style, the handwriting. He had seen it before. It was Marcus. He couldn't stop the laugh that escaped him, shaky, nervous, relieved. Marcus, the boy who had stayed behind while Aiden walked free, had survived differently, had learned differently. The letter was a reminder, not a threat, a warning, not a trap. Aiden spent that night walking the city streets, reading and rereading the words. He thought about how fragile life was, how easily one misstep could unravel everything. And then he realized something. He had learned more in that year than most people would in a lifetime. Not about games, or money, or rules. About himself. The next day, he called his mother and arranged to meet her for lunch. A simple thing he had almost forgotten how to enjoy. He didn't tell her about the letter. Some lessons were too heavy to share. A week later, he received another message, this time digital. It contained nothing but a single video file. Hesitant, he opened it. Marcus appeared on screen, sitting in the same facility Aiden had left. "I'm out in a year," Marcus said, grinning. "And you? You're out here pretending life's easy. Remember? You were lucky, kid. Don't waste it." The screen went black. No instructions, no follow-ups. Just him. His choice. Aiden stared at the darkness for a long time, and then, for the first time in years, he understood something profound. Freedom wasn't given. Freedom wasn't luck. Freedom wasn't being released from walls or consequences. Freedom was choosing every day to live differently, to take what you had survived and turn it into something real, to walk forward knowing you had been tested, knowing you had failed, knowing you had learned, and that nothing could take that away. He shut the laptop, The city hummed outside. The streets, the people, the noise. It was all alive, chaotic, dangerous. And for the first time it felt exhilarating. Aiden smiled. He had been punished. He had been watched. He had been used and nearly destroyed. But he was still here, still thinking, still free. In the only way that mattered, he stepped outside, and the world waited for him.